So take one, send the rest around. And all right, video running? Good. Okay, so thanks everybody for showing up today. I do appreciate you being here. What I'm going to talk about today is just a little bit of background on our voting system, how voting and the campaign process typically happens in the U.S. Especially, I think it's kind of especially relevant right now because it's a presidential election year and we're in the kind of the last little rundown of the campaign season. It's been going on since about February, if you noticed and paid attention. And I know that if it's not something that you've spent a lot of time focusing on paying attention to, especially if it's the first round of this process when you're in that age of voting window, a lot of it can sometimes be a little bit mysterious and confusing even about what this is all about and how politics works in America. When it works, sometimes it doesn't work very well, but that's another story altogether. So anyway, as we go into an election season, you hear a lot of people talking about issues and things that are going on in the country and in the world, and you hear a lot of labels being thrown out there, things like liberals and conservatives and the left and the right and Democrats and Republicans. And if you're not familiar with what some of those things mean, it can get confusing. And most folks, when they start thinking about maybe, exercising their franchise and getting out and voting themselves, kind of want to know where you stand. And so that's a little bit of what I want to give you to work with today too. So if you look at the top of that sheet I just gave you on the front, you see that little number line looking thing that I drew out there. That's basically a little two-dimensional picture of the political spectrum. And usually when we talk about politics and government, we talk about being either on the right or on the left. The right side is usually considered to be conservative. And conservative doesn't necessarily mean right all the time, but the left is often considered to be liberal or Democrat. So that's really just how that process works. And you'll notice that it's not like a one or the other. It is a spectrum. It is a range of. So you have people who are on the right, you have people who are on the left. You got people that are way out there on the right and way out on the left, but there's also a lot of folks that are more in the middle, more moderate. And moderates, sometimes you'll hear them called centrists. You'll hear a lot of labels being thrown around out there. And you don't have to land on one side or other of that line for every single opinion that you have, politically speaking. You can be mostly right on some things, but then lean left on certain others. You can be all over the map. You can be basically every single issue, every single candidate different, not based on where they are on this map, but where you are on it. And I forgot something that I really wanted to start this talk off with today. And that's, there's two things that, number one, the biggest, most important part of this whole thing is that if you're going to vote, and I really, really, really want you to, because a population that votes is a strong and stable and free society. But for that process to really work, your vote should be an informed vote, meaning that you make a decision on how you're going to vote based on good information, based on logical, rational reasons. You look at an issue, you think about what it means either way, and you make a decision about what you think is best. And you do the same thing with candidates. You look at their history. You look at what they've stood for in the past. You look at what they're promising to do versus what they've done before. You look at their integrity. You've got to make a decision on some of this stuff, and sometimes you don't necessarily have all the information, but limited good information is better than just going with feeling. You know, I don't like the way he looks. I don't like her hairstyle. You know, that person said something that made me mad, so I'm not going to vote for him. All those things are emotion-based, and making these decisions really should be logical and rational. So information is crucial. The other thing I wanted to say too is that I'm going to try really, really hard today not to let any of my own personal politics come out in what we talk about. If I do this right, you'll walk out of the room today not knowing whether I'm a conservative or a liberal, because I really want to give you both sides. I want to give you both aspects to work from, and then you can decide on your own without any influence from someone else what you really believe and what you really feel. So hopefully I'm not going to let any of my bias out. If I do, I apologize. I don't want to unduly influence anybody, at least not in this setting where we're sitting in a class and I'm effectively teaching. And I taught 8th graders for a while, and of course in 8th grade you learn about the Constitution, you learn a little bit about politics, and I always had students who would ask me, hey, who are you voting for? Which side are you on that? And I would say, don't ask, I'm not going to tell you. I will not do that, because I did not want to use my position to unfairly influence somebody to think like me. Now, if I happen to run into you somewhere in a public place and we're sitting around just chit-chatting about this, that, and the other, and you want to know my opinion on something politically speaking, get ready, because I'll let it go. That's one of those things that if you nail me down and start asking questions, I'll talk politics all day long. And I have strong opinions, and I hold those opinions strongly. And I know I'm not always right, but I try to be rational and logical and have the things that I think make sense. So that's really the idea there. So, what are you? Where do you land on the spectrum yourself? It's hard to answer that question if you don't have a background in this. So what I've made here is I've made up this nice little table that kind of gives you an idea one way or the other. And again, remember, you don't have to put yourself in a box on one side or the other exclusively. But thinking about where you stand on some of these issues one way or the other can help guide you to how you're going to want to vote on something, or how you're going to want to vote for someone. Because ideally, you would like to see people in office that believe the same way that you do, okay? So, working down from the top there, if you're a liberal, liberals tend to like the idea of bigger government, meaning that they see problems in the world, and they think that the best way to fix those problems is to have more big programs, throw more money at the problem, pass more laws to address the problem. All of that leads to a larger government structure. The downside to that process is that always costs money. One of the big ones coming from the liberal side these days is free health care. It's a big bug that we should be providing free health insurance to everybody in the country. Free college education is another one. Free housing is a big one. They see these things as problems, and paying for it to fix it is one way to solve the problem, which is okay, it would to an extent, but the reality of life is that nothing is free. If you're getting something for free, it means it's not costing you anything, but somebody's paying for it. So that's the liberal side of the political spectrum. On the conservative side, most conservatives like the idea of smaller government. The government should be doing less and being involved in people's lives less. Let people figure stuff out on their own. Let the community solve a problem rather than taxing a bunch of people, taking the money and paying for a program. That's much more of a conservative perspective. Conservatives like the idea of lower taxes. Let people keep more of their money and not so much take it from the government. I had a conversation with someone not too long ago who said something about, oh yeah, well, the government will pay for that. The government doesn't have any money. The government doesn't make money. They don't do anything. They don't produce anything. They don't do a job. They don't make money. You and I make money. They take the money from us. So everything that the government paid for is paid for by us. And if you're not paying taxes directly, you're paying them indirectly. Because if you're renting an apartment or a house or something, the person you're renting it for is paying the property tax on it. They build that into the cost of the rent. You go to the grocery store and you buy stuff, you pay sales taxes on that. You're also paying the store's taxes. So everything works down to the end consumer, they call us, which is all of us basically. So the next piece about this division is foreign policy. How do we look at our relationship with other countries around the world? Liberals tend to prefer diplomacy. If we've got a problem with another country, we want to go talk about it. We want to figure out a way to solve the problem without resorting to sending the Marines in. That's called a dove approach, because doves are supposed to be nice and peaceful. Conservatives tend to lend more to using military force where we need to solve a problem. That's a hawk approach, because hawks are not nice and peaceful. They like to swoop in and eat things. It's funny that has fallen out to be the perception of the two sides, because every major conflict that the United States has gotten involved in the last 100 years, with the exception of the war on terror in the last 20 or so, every single one of those was led by a Democrat liberal presidents. So World War I, we got into that when Woodrow Wilson was president. He was a Democrat. We get into World War II under Roosevelt. He was a Democrat. We go into Vietnam under Johnson. He was a Democrat. So it doesn't always hold true, but it does tend to be a certain way. Another one is gun rights. So conservatives are really, really strong on Second Amendment. They really strongly believe that as long as there's not a good solid reason to keep you from owning a gun, like if you're a convicted felon or you have mental health issues or something like that, then you should be able to do that. You should be able to own a firearm because the Constitution says you have the right to. Liberals, on the other hand, want to limit gun rights. They want more restrictions on gun ownership. They want more control on that. So that's another big divide. If you're in favor of gun ownership, you're leaning more conservative. If you want to take guns away from people and not allow them to have it or make it harder, that's a more of a liberal approach.
Or restrict the types of guns people
Or restrict the types of guns. Exactly. Abortion's another big dividing line between liberals and conservatives. Conservatives are, generally speaking, most of the time very strongly pro-life. Liberals are usually very strongly pro-choice. They want a woman to have that option to make that decision themselves and not limit their rights or their access to an abortion. Social liberties, things like same-sex marriage, legalizing marijuana. Liberals tend to be very strongly in favor of those things, and they push for those agendas. Conservatives have historically been against those ideas and have struggled against them over time. Another one is support for police and law enforcement. Liberals have historically been perceived, at least, as being soft on crime. You'll hear that a lot in a campaign. That my opponent's soft on crime because he's a liberal. There have been a lot of movements to limit the ability of police. There have been a lot of movements to defund police departments and take stuff away from them. And they also focus a lot more on rehabilitating criminal, people who've been convicted. Less time in jail, more time in therapy. That's a very liberal approach. Conservatives tend to be harder on crime. They want to see a stronger police force. They want to see longer sentences. They want to see people having harder consequences for breaking the law. Okay. Another one is immigration and border control. Liberals are light on immigration. They tend to want more open borders. They want to see more benefits for people who are here illegally, who've gotten across the border somehow. They want to make life better for those people. It's a softer, more compassionate approach. Conservatives want to close the border down. They want to shut it down and really, really limit that illegal immigration. They're not necessarily against immigration in general. They're just against the idea of people coming across the border illegally. And if you're here, then you should be working towards either getting a green card or citizenship. Okay, so those are the two sides to most of the issues I could think of, and I'm sure there's more here. I probably could have spent an hour going into things like tax policy and foreign trade, but those are the landmark ideas that divide conservatives and liberals. You can look at that, and like I said, you don't have to line up on one side or the other. You're free to 2 from column A and 3 from column B, or however you want to land. But it does give you a way to look at and think about the things that you think and you believe. When you hear about it on the news and you go, oh, that's wrong, it shouldn't be like that. Then you can go, oh, that's a liberal thinking, or oh, that's a conservative thinking, and that helps you figure out where you're at. Okay? So, as I said a little while ago, we're in the middle of a presidential campaign. And the process usually starts in January or February, where you get a bunch of guys and now ladies, of course, too, who throw their hat in the ring and say, hey, I want to be your president this year. And the process starts with a lot of campaigning and a lot of speeches. And then usually right about the end of February, we start doing state primary elections. And what that process is each state holds a primary, and that's kind of a first round in the election process. And each party will present a group of candidates to be voted on. Now, if your state has an open primary, you get to vote on everybody, it doesn't matter which party. If you have a closed primary, which California has a closed primary, you only get to vote for candidates that are in the party that you have put on your registration. So if you register as a Democrat, you're gonna get to pick the Democrat candidates. You can pick one of those. That's it. You don't get to vote on the Republican side, or vice versa. The reason for that is the idea of these primary elections that, like I said, start in February and go through June, is to give each party an idea of which one of their candidates is most popular. Okay? So that process goes, like I said, through about June or so. And then when they finish up in June, sometime during the summer, typically in July, the party will hold a big convention. It's a huge hoo-ha where all the candidates come out and give speeches. There's a round of votes from the delegates at the convention. And eventually the convention will choose one nominee, one candidate from their party to stand on the ballot in November when we do the general election for the whole country. Once that happens, that candidate will choose a vice president as their running mate. That goes on the ballot. That's who you end up voting for in November. This time around, we actually had something happen that has never happened before. Back in February, the Democrat Party really didn't put many candidates out there because the president sitting in the White House, the incumbent, was a Democrat, President Biden. So he was what most people would call the presumptive nominee, meaning basically he's already in the office, he's running for re-election. We're not going to run somebody up against him. We don't want division in the party. So we're just assuming that he's going to steamroll through and he's going to get the nomination for November. But then he does the debate with Mr. Trump and did a horrible job in the debate. I don't usually watch those because I don't like the drama and I don't like all the with it. But the little bit of it that I saw, Joe looked like he was lost. He was really confused. And apparently everybody else saw the same thing, because there started immediately a lot of chatter about, is he healthy enough to do the job? And apparently not, because a couple of weeks after the first debate, he withdrew from the campaign altogether, took his name out of running. Well, at that point in time, the Democrats don't really have another candidate, so they got to figure out, what do we do next? So without anybody ever having voted for her, they decided that their candidate is Kamala Harris. Which, because all of those primary elections are not, they're not legally binding elections, it's really more of an opinion poll. It's just, what do people think? And so that's why they could get away with it, which is why we now have Kamala versus Donald in November. So it's going to be interesting. First time in history that that's happened. Most of the time before that, everybody was pretty much set going into the conventions. And going to be very, very interesting. Okay, at the same time that we're voting for president in November, there's going to be a number of other things that you're going to get to vote on. All of our congressmen, all the guys that are in the House of Representatives, they are up for re-election every 2 years. So they just went through this whole process 2 years ago. They're going to do it again. So you've got a lot of incumbents, guys that are already in the office. They're running for re-election. You've got somebody running against them. And again, you have to make a decision. Am I going to go Republican? Am I going to go Democrat? You get to pick based on who they are. Okay. The Senate they are re-elected every 6 years. I don't think we have a Senate race in California this year, because I think ours was 2 years ago, and then the other one was 2 years before that. Yes, question.
Which one's the middle?
Which
Neutral.
one?
Yeah, like for the.
Who's in the middle right now, as far as somebody is running?
Yeah, like
I
has there ever been like.
don't know anybody right now. To be honest with you, that's one of the things that I've always. I'm going to get sidetracked here. Here we go. I have long believed for the last several years that we need a good middle of the road party, because there's a lot of folks on the right that have moved way too far to the right, and a lot of folks on the left that have moved way too far to the left, and we don't have a good strong middle. And that middle is kind of what holds everything together. So it's hard for a moderate candidate to get elected, because in order to get into office, you are going to either spend a ton of money. I mean, a presidential election will cost you tens of millions of dollars. It's hard to get elected if you're in the middle, because you need the support of the party. The party wants to know that you're going to be firmly on their side and not, wishy-washy in the middle. That's kind of one of the downside to American politics, is that we are very divided, right and left. I'd love to see it go back towards the middle. So in addition to Congress, there may be a bunch of local offices that are up for election, like the mayor, county supervisors, school board districts, city council. Most of those offices are not partisan, in the sense that they're not Republican versus Democrat. It's just a local guy who wants the job. And you kind of have to listen to what they say, read their statements in the newspaper, pay attention to stuff that's going on around you, and see what they've gotten into over the years. Also in California, there are going to be a lot of ballot measures. Ballot measures happen when somebody gets enough signatures on a petition to put something on the ballot to make a new law. If that law passes, if that ballot measure passes with enough votes, then it becomes a law. It usually goes into effect, I think, at the first of the year. In the last few years, I think the ones that stand out to me are the one that state of California passed one that said that that recreational marijuana is now legal, and that's how that got to be a law in the state. Another one was when they got rid of single-use disposable grocery bags. Remember how you used to go to the grocery store? They would just give you a bag, and it was that real thin plastic, and when you're done with it, you throw it away. Those are illegal now in California because there was a ballot measure that was passed. There was another ballot measure about, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 years ago. I remember it was Prop 8 and it passed in California, that put a clause in the state constitution that said that marriage is only between a man and a woman. So it absolutely outlawed same-sex marriage in California. But then Supreme Court of the United States turned around and said, no, you can't do that. That's why, even though that clause is still in the Constitution for the state of California, it cannot be enforced because the Supreme Court overruled it. Okay. In fact, there's a ballot measure on the November ballot to remove that from the Constitution. It's kind of pointless because the Supreme Court's already ruled on it and said it can't work, but some folks want to get it out of the Constitution just in case the Supreme Court ever changes their mind. So, anyway. So, who gets to vote? There are basically four requirements. Number one, you have to be a citizen of the United States, and you have to live in California. You have to live in the state of California if you want to vote in California. If you're a citizen and you live in Nevada, you get to vote in Nevada or whatever state you're in. But the primary requirement is that you need to be a citizen, whether you're born naturally or whether you become a citizen after you've lived here for a while. Second one is you need to be 18 years or older on election day. So if election day is your birthday, you're good to go. You get to vote. You cannot be currently in prison for a felony conviction. And up until a few years ago, it used to be that if you had a felony conviction, even after you got out of prison, you were still denied the right to vote for a time. You basically had to demonstrate good citizenship, get a job, stay out of trouble, stay out of jail, and then go back to the court and petition to have your voting rights reinstated. A few years back, the state of California decided, we're not going to do that. You have a felony conviction, you go to prison, you serve your time. When you're released and you're done, you can vote in the next election. And the last requirement is you cannot be currently mentally incompetent. And what that means is that you've not been put under what's called a conservatorship by the court. That typically happens in cases where someone is either mentally disabled or developmentally disabled and just not capable of making a decision about voting or something like that, or elderly folks who are suffering from dementia, that kind of a thing. It's the idea is that we want people who are mentally capable and can function on their own to be the ones voting. Okay, so if you're not any of those, you're legal to vote in the state of California. If you're not, quick question: is anybody in here not registered to vote? Everybody has registered? Sweet. Proud of you guys. Do it. Make sure you keep your address up to date with the county clerk's office, because when you register, what they will do is a few weeks before the actual election, they will send you a voter's guide. At some point, you'll get a ballot, an actual ballot to fill out. And then you can fill that ballot out, you can seal it up, and you can drop it in the mail. Post office will get it to the county clerk's office. If you don't trust that process very well, you can do the same thing, fill out your ballot, seal it up, take it down to the county office and drop it in the box there. I know on election day, back during the pandemic stuff, They actually had people on the sidewalk there by the courthouse. You could drive by and hand it to them, and they'd put it in the box right there. Or you still have the option to go to your polling place on election day. I think they open about 7. I think they're open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And go sign the register. If you do that, you have to take the ballot that they mailed you. You have to take that with you, turn that into them, and they're going to shred it because it's not valid. And then they'll give you a new one, and you go in the booth and do your thing there, mark all the ballots. I have not used, and I've not seen any of the electronic voting machines in California. Some states are using them, some aren't. Some places are. Those are kind of like an ATM. You go in and you push a button and it pops up, and it's like, who do you want for president? You vote for that person. Then it goes through the whole cycle that way. If you have not done it, if you've not gone down on election day to a polling place and voted in person, I strongly urge you to do it. I've always believed it's something of a sacred duty to vote. I mean, we have this right that a lot of people in the world don't have, and it's been paid for in blood. It's something that we should be doing. And there's just something almost spiritual about going to a ballot place and sitting there and marking a ballot and turning it in person. Plus they give you that little cool sticker to put on your shirt that says, I voted. You get to wear it around all day and show it off. Like, look, I did this. So, and that's the other reason you want to keep your address up to date with the county clerk, because when that packet comes in the mail with the voter guide that tells you everything that's on the ballot, and there's a bunch of speeches and there's a bunch of statements from candidates and stuff in there, in that packet it'll tell you where your specific polling place is based on where you live. So you can't just pick one and show up. You've got to go to the one that you're assigned to. But again, if you haven't done that, do it at some point. You'll remember it. It's a thing. You should do it. I remember the first time I got to vote. It was a minute. Anyway, like I said at the beginning, making an informed decision is the best thing. That's really the purpose of doing this process. The problem today is getting good information. The media, mainstream media especially, has kind of quit. They've given up on their job that they've done for decades, if not longer. It used to be that the purpose of the media was to inform all of us. Tell us, here's what happened, this is what this person said or did, these were the events that happened, and then you could use that information to make a decision and form an opinion on your own. What the media has done nowadays is they've decided they're not going to tell you what happened, they're going to tell you what to think. So most of the mainstream media outlets are now in the business of shaping opinion. They want to push everybody in one direction or the other. So there's a lot of bias in that media. And if you watch CNN, if you watch Fox, if you watch MSNBC, you'll sense that bias. And it's not always so much in them blatantly in your face and saying, this is what you should believe, or this is what you should think, these things are right, these things are wrong. It's not so much that. Sometimes it's just in what they cover and what they ignore, and also how often they come back to the same story. And if you see them hammering a certain story over and over and over, you can pretty much assume that there's something there they want to push an idea on, and that's kind of a trigger for the bias piece right there. But at the bottom of at the back page, at the very bottom, I've given you some places to look to get some more balanced and less biased information. There's an organization called the Pew Research Center. They have a lot of articles there that are about political analysis. It's like, this is what's going on, and here's what it probably means. They do tend to be very balanced. They don't take one side or the other. You can read some of those articles and kind of start developing some ideas of your own. Another one is the League of Women Voters for California. I know this is women voters, but guys can look at it too. They're a really good source for the ballot measures that are coming up, because they'll tell you what each one is going to cost. They'll give you an analysis of how effective it's going to be, and whether or not it's going to work. And they will give you a recommendation. They'll say, this is one you should vote no on. This is one you should vote yes. But they're upfront about their recommendation. They're not trying to sneak one in on you there. Politico.com is another one. They do a lot of reporting on some of the stuff that's going on in Washington and in Sacramento, and just giving you a good solid analysis of what things mean, but without throwing the bias and all that in there. And then if you just want to follow news and see what's happening in the world and in the country without a lot of this stuff that goes on otherwise, you can check out the Associated Press. They do have a website with a lot of news stories. And then listen to National Public Radio, NPR. And then one last one I'll give you, I didn't put on the sheet. If you would like to just have a good show to watch, that also does a really good job, I think, of kind of shining light on the political process in the U.S., especially in the Washington world, national politics. Check out a show called The West Wing. It's a drama about a White House office, the president, all of his aides, and all the people who work with him. They go through a couple of election cycles. You get to see how they deal with and work with Congress in making laws, how they deal with budget issues, how they deal with foreign policy stuff. It's a great show, great writing, and great characters. But from an educational perspective, it also does a pretty decent job of showing what that whole process is really like. You can actually learn something about American politics from watching West Wing. So, anyway, any questions? No comments? No nothing? Who's going to vote? You better all. I want to see stickers. Thank you for coming. I do appreciate all your time. Have a good one.